Hi, this is Glenn Ambort. I'm going to be broadcasting some videos on John Benson's new book, Taxation by Misrepresentation, The Truth About Taxes in Plain English. The videos cannot go into all the detail that the book can go into, but it'll give you the core essence of the book and enable you to decide whether or not it's something you want to pursue by purchasing the book, or you want to study on your own. And I'll give you references that you can go look up these kinds of things. Now, I'm not a professional online marketer, so if I make mistakes in these things, I hope you will be forgiving and allow me to be my unprofessional self. What I want to do here first, I'm going to be reading some of this stuff off the computer itself, so if I don't look into the camera sometimes it's because I'm looking down at the computer. We just had a testimonial from a fellow who just finished reading this book. This gentleman is an executive with a senior executive with a large multi-billion-dollar online internet company. So he's a man with considerable intelligence and knowledge of online marketing and so forth. Anyway, here's what he wrote. He wrote, "Proof that paying federal income tax is voluntary." Now this is his testimony that I'm reading. "Over the years of studying government tyranny, monetary reform, and freedom, I've run across a lot of information about how unconstitutional the U.S. income tax is, how the 16th Amendment was never ratified by the requisite numbers of states, and how there's really no law that compels citizens to pay federal income tax. One of the best documentaries on this topic was the late Aaron Russo's film, From Freedom to Fascism. At one of Ron Paul's early campaign rallies in the Bay Area in July 2007, I even arranged for Joe Bannister, a former IRS enforcement agent and whistleblower living locally in San Jose, to speak about the topic. A lot of the arguments seemed very convoluted to me, and for sure nothing seemed clear enough that you could take on the IRS and a heavy-handed judiciary and expect to come away unscathed. Along comes a fantastic new ebook, Taxation by Misrepresentation, by John W. Benson, which I now believe is by far the best resource to understanding the true constitutional aspects of our income tax system, as well as the origin of the laws and processes involved in compelling citizens to pay it. Far from being convoluted, it is an extremely logical, sound, and extraordinarily well-researched book. The engineer in me can connect all the dots and see where all the legal facts and foundations lie. The book lays out the definitive case that the U.S. income tax is absolutely a voluntary tax, which cannot be made compulsory by virtue of its unconstitutional nature, and which requires a great deal of fraud and outright intimidation on the part of the IRS to convince people that what can only be voluntary is instead a lawful requirement. He goes on for several other paragraphs and talks about the book in some detail. I'm not going to go into that, but what I want to do is to go into the book itself, and what I'm going to do is a series of short videos. I hope they're in the range of 2 to 5 minutes, and put the description of each video on the website, so that those who want to skip to a certain lesson can go to that very quickly and will not have to be bored with going through, a half hour of information that they didn't really want to see at that point. John's book, Taxation by Misrepresentation, The Truth About Income Taxes in Plain English, starts out by this quote by Dresden James: "When a well-packaged web of lies has been sold gradually to the masses over generations, the truth will seem utterly preposterous and its speaker a raving lunatic." So I guess I'm going to be the raving lunatic on here to go over this material with you and explain it to you as best I can in a audio and video presentation here. John starts out with a disclaimer, and essentially the disclaimer, I'm just going to abbreviate what it says in there. The disclaimer says that, hey, I researched this material, I believe it's true, I'm not an attorney, This is for education only. It's for political discussion. It's not to encourage anybody to stop paying or filing income taxes, but to get out what I believe the truth of the income tax laws, procedures, and processes are, and let people bring that up in their political debates here in this election year, and see if we can't get this current tax system changed to where it's honest, truthful, transparent, and complies with the requirements of our Constitution. The first chapter goes into a foreword where he talks about his history, where he researched this over 35 years. He gave up considerable business opportunities to research this full time, even at one point for about a year and a half living in a back of a carpet warehouse where he slept on mattress on some carpets and a space heater, and lived there without a job for a year and a half so he could research this material in the University of Denver Law School Library there in Denver, Colorado. And after 35 years, he has put together what he believes to be the definitive book on income taxes. It's material unlike anything you'll ever read anywhere else in current books or publications of any kind. There's no court cases that goes into the details that we're going to talk about here in the book, although we do cite quite a bit of, I say we because John asked me to edit the book. He's almost blind, and so I do a lot of his internet work for him. Chapter 1 is entitled Tax Returns Form the Pillars of the Income Tax System. No wheel turns, nothing happens in the Internal Revenue System until a tax return has been filed. Now that tax return for individuals is almost invariably some variation of the Form 1040. The Form 1040 is titled the U.S. Individual Income Tax Return, and on that, of course, everybody is probably familiar with that. Briefly, it outlines your income and your deductions and the amount of tax, and you sign it under penalty of perjury and submit it to the IRS usually by the 15th of April each year. Nothing happens in the Internal Revenue Service until that form is filed. If you fail to file it, there are two paths the IRS can go down. One, they can go after you civilly, or they can go after you criminally. We're going to talk about both of those aspects here later on in the book. If they come after you civilly, you'll end up possibly going into tax court. We'll also talk about that. But for the moment, we're going to talk about who is required to file that income tax return. And the tax that is imposed upon people in Americans in the Internal Revenue Code is in Section 1 of the Internal Revenue Code, and it imposes the income and all taxable income of every citizen and resident in the United States, and to a certain other extent on non-resident aliens or foreigners. Now, the first thing you got to determine is whether or not you had the amount of if you had any taxable income at all. And taxable income is defined in general in the Internal Revenue Code as your gross income less allowable deductions. So the first thing to do is to find out who has the duty to file these tax returns. And there are two sections in the Internal Revenue Code that address the requirement to file tax returns. One is in 6011 and one is in 6012. And briefly, what they each state is that 6011 says anybody who is made liable for any tax within the Internal Revenue Code has to file a statement or a return. Now, how do you find out if you've been made liable for any tax? Well, in general, the requirement is put upon the Secretary of the Treasury or his delegate to send you a notice that you've been made liable for these taxes. Now, I don't know anybody in my 20 years of studying this material, and John in 35 years, who's ever gotten any kind of notice like that. So generally speaking, you never get a notice that you've been made liable to a tax, because in order to get a notice that you've been made liable to a tax, there has to have been an assessment made against you. No assessment is ever made until a return is filed. So in general, you're never going to get this kind of a notice. So 6011 is really not going to apply to most people. 6012, Section 6012 of the Internal Revenue Code imposes a duty to file a tax return on anybody who has a gross income that exceeds the exemption amount. The exemption amount is established in, I think it's Section 501 of the Internal Revenue Code, but you can look that up to verify my memory. Anyway, the important point is, what is gross income? Gross income is defined in the Internal Revenue Code, and more specifically in the tax regulations or treasury regulations at 26 CFR, that's CFR stands for Code of Federal Regulations, 26 CFR 1.161-1, 1.61-1, and it says that gross income means all income from whatever source derived, unless excluded by law. Wow, well, those last four words, unless excluded by law, are very key to understanding the materials that we're going to cover. So in the next video, I'm going to go into what is gross income and try to explain that more in detail to you. Okay, let me see if I can figure out how to stop this thing and go on to the next one. Okay, where's the stop on this? Okay, there it is.